Good morning. Subcommittee of Water Resource and Environment, Subcommittee of T&I will come to order. Welcome our panels. We're going to have two panels today, but open up there some opening remarks. The hearing today is about the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. It's a review of the progress and challenges in restoring the Great Lakes. Great Lakes, of course, are a vital source for both the United States and Canada to move goods, supply drinking water, industrial and agricultural purposes. It's a source of hydraulic electric power and swimming and other recreational activities. But the industrialization and development of the Great Lakes Basin over the past 200 years has had an impact on water quality in the Great Lakes. The Great Lakes are a high priority to our members from Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and New York, particularly in those districts that are border the lakes. However, the Great Lakes are also important to our entire nation. The Great Lakes are the largest surface water freshwater system on the earth, with 6 quadrillion gallons. That's a lot of water. I don't know how much quadrillion is.
California.
Not going to happen. The Great Lakes accounts for approximately 20% of the world's fresh water and approximately 90% of the U.S. freshwater supply. 35 million people live in the Great Lakes region, representing roughly 1/10 of the U.S. population and 1/4 of the Canadian population. The lakes are the primary water supply for most of these people. The Great Lakes constitute the largest inland water transportation system in the world and have played an important role in the economic development for both the United States and Canada. According to some estimates, the Great Lakes help support more than $200 billion a year in economic activity in the region and contribute nearly 1/4 of the nation's exports and 27% of the U.S. gross domestic product. Over 200 million tons of cargo is shipped annually through the Great Lakes. The Great Lakes present a unique environmental challenge. Legacy issues, including the buildup of toxic substances in lake sediments are areas of concern, and the introduction of invasive plant and animal species are impacting the Great Lakes. More than 180 invasive aquatic species have become established in the Great Lakes, including at least 25 major non-native species of fish and zebra mussels, which invade and clog water intake pipes, costing water and electric generating utilities hundreds of millions of dollars in prevention and remediation efforts. Efforts to improve the Great Lakes water quality and restore the health of the Great Lakes ecosystem are proceeding through cooperative efforts with Canada, as well as through efforts of numerous federal, state, tribal, local, and private parties. The EPA, the Army Corps of Engineers, Fish and Wildlife Service, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, the U.S. Geological Survey, the Natural Resources Conservation Service, the Great Lakes states, local communities, industry, and other parties are all involved. With so many parties involved in trying to restore the Great Lakes, coordination of the effort can be difficult. To improve coordination, in 2004, the President signed an executive order creating the Great Lakes Interagency Task Force. The executive order called for the development of outcome-based goals like cleaner water, sustainable fisheries, a system of biodiversity, and called on the task force to ensure federal efforts are coordinated and targeted measurable results. The task force, under the lead of the EPA, brings together 11 federal agencies responsible for administering more than 140 different programs in the Great Lakes region to provide strategic direction on federal policy, priorities, and programs for restoring the Great Lakes. Congress has enacted more than 30 federal laws specifically focused on Great Lakes restoration, and there are currently more than 200 programs that provide funding and the resources to Great Lakes states for restoration activities. In 2010, the task force released an action plan as part of the new Great Lakes Restoration Initiative to accelerate efforts to protect and restore the Great Lakes. More than 2,000 projects have been funded to date through the first action plan. In September of 2014, the federal agencies released and updated the Action Plan 2, which summarizes the actions that the federal agencies plan to implement during fiscal years 2015 and through 2019 using Great Lakes funding. The action plan aims to strategically target the 5 biggest threats to the Great Lakes ecosystem and to accelerate progress toward long-term goals. The 5 focus areas in the summary include 1, toxic substances, invasive species, non-point source pollution, habitat restoration, and accountability and education. Since the beginning of the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, there have been a concern voiced by some that the restoration activities slowed or even been halted due to lack of coordination among the federal agencies that encompass the task force. Other critiques include the lack of communication between the federal task force and their partners in state governments. In response to my request, the General Accountability Office conducted a review of the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative implementation and prepared reports of its findings in 2013 and July of this year. Our colleague, Congressman David Joyce from Ohio, introduced H.R. 223 to amend the Great Lakes Program provisions under Section 118 of the Clean Water Act to formally authorize the Clean Lakes Restoration Initiative for 5 years and to carry out projects and activities for Great Lakes protection and restoration. Under this legislation, the Environmental Protection Agency is to collaborate with other federal partners, including the Great Lakes Interagency Task Force, to select the best combination of projects and activities for Great Lakes protection and restoration. This hearing today is intended to review the progress of the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative and to hear from witnesses on the implementation of the GLRI program and the types of improvements that need to be made to the program. I look forward to hearing from the witnesses, and at this time I recognize my ranking member from California, Ms. Napolitano. There you go.
Thank you, Chairman Gibbs, for today's hearing on the Great Lakes Initiative, Restoration Initiative, and thus providing the subcommittee with a chance to review the progress made in the restoration of one of our nation's greatest resources, the Great Lakes. I welcome to our witnesses and look forward to hearing your testimony and to engaging dialogue on this very successful program. The Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, known as GLRI, something like that, was organized in 2010 to coordinate the multitude of efforts already underway to protect and restore the Great Lakes, the world's largest system of fresh surface water and the source of drinking water for over 40 million Americans. As we can imagine, the economic importance of the Great Lakes to the country cannot be overstated. The 4.3 million recreational boats registered in the Great Lakes alone create nearly $16 billion in economic activities each year that support 107,000 jobs annually. Specifically, the program was created to clean up toxics and address areas of concern, combat invasive species, of which I'm very interested in how you combat the quagga mussel issue, because that's California's biggest issue in some of the western states. To protect watersheds from pollutant-laden runoff, restore wetlands and track progress, education, especially on invasive species, I think, and collaboration with strategic partners, including state and local governments and other stakeholders. During the first 5 years of this program, $1.68 billion of federal funding was allocated to over 2,100 projects that were implemented to improve water quality, control or eradicate harmful invasive species, and restore valuable ecosystems. In that time, and because of federal support, the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative has enjoyed the following accomplishments. 5 areas of concern have been removed from the list of contaminated areas. 42 beneficial use impairment in 17 areas of concern were removed. Target level control populations have been reached for multiple invasive species, including the bighead carp, sea lamprey, and emerald ash borer. Interesting. Federal and state local partners increased the number of acres of farmland enrolled in agricultural conservation programs in the program, priority watersheds, by more than 80%. More than 100,000 acres of wetlands and 48,000 acres of coastal upland and inland habitat are now protected. While much more work remains to be done, these are demonstrable successes, and I commend today's witnesses for their dedication to the success of this program. In September 2013, GAO released a report recommending EPA develop a more comprehensive and useful progress assessment tool for demonstrating the program's accomplishment. Understand that we look at some of these things and we want to understand it and not have to ask questions about what does it mean. GAO found that the GLRI's monitoring system at the time may have been deficient, but also found that GAO and others have noted that quantifying overall restoration progress in the Great Lakes is a very difficult task, and that it's often impossible to link specific environmental changes to specific programs or projects, which most of them are long-term. Again, earlier this year, the GAO concluded an extensive study of the use of these funds. It examined the amount of the funds available for projects and process used by GLRI to identify projects and the GLRI's reporting tools. I am very pleased to say that EPA took action to address, thank you very much, the recommendations made by the draft GAO report prior to the release of the report. And in doing so, established a new system for entering data and created new data control methods. Having undertaken these efforts, EPA and its partners will be better able to track and demonstrate the success of the program. So in the 5 short years, this program's, since its inception, communities through the Great Lakes region have enjoyed measurable results that have made a difference in the lives of their citizens and their economy. One might ask, what has made the difference? And to answer this question, I point to the GAO report published in September 2004, which found that the lack of clearly defined organizational leadership posed a major obstacle, and that coordinating existing restoration efforts across the many participating organizations was a significant challenge. So we need to be able to address that so we can understand it when we are able to go through and look at what improvements, what challenges have been addressed. I would argue that today you have overcome these challenges. Simply put, this is one of the most influential, coordinated interagency efforts in the country and stands as an example of what we can achieve when multiple partners agree, work together toward a common goal, politics aside. Again, I welcome our witnesses and thank you for your testimony. And Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Before I recognize our witnesses, we have a little bit of housekeeping. I ask unanimous consent that the hearing record be kept open for 30 days after this hearing in order to accept written testimony for the hearing record. Is there objection? Objection? Without objection, so ordered. I also ask unanimous consent that written testimony submitted on behalf of the following parties be included in this hearing's record. David Aldrich, the Executive Director of the Great Lakes and St. Lawrence Cities Initiative. Clarence Anthony, the CEO and Executive Director of the National League of Cities. Matthew Chase, the Executive Director of the National Association of Counties. Tom Corcoran, the CEO and Executive Director of the U.S. Conference of Mayors. Joanna Turner, the Executive Director of the National Association of Regional Councils. Tracy Meehan, the Executive Director of Government Affairs for the American Water Works Association. John Hall, the Executive Director of the Center for Regulatory Reasonableness. And Christopher Riccido, the General Counsel for the Center for Regulatory Reasonableness, and Adam Krantz, the CEO of the National Association of Clean Water Agencies. Is there objection? Without objection, so ordered. Today we've got two panels. Our first panel is Mr. Chris Korolowski. He's Director of the Great Lakes National Program Office, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency in Chicago, and also a former Director of the Ohio EPA when I was in the legislature. We also have Mr. Jose Gomez. He's the Director of the Natural Resources and Environment, U.S. Government Accountability Office, Washington, D.C., and Mr. Tony Kramer. He's the Acting Regional Conservationist for the Northeast region of the National Resource Conservation Service of Washington, D.C. Welcome, panelists, and Mr. Korolowski, the floor is yours. And may pull it up close to yourself. This room, sometimes it's hard to hear.
Volume okay? Can everyone hear me? Okay. Well, good morning, Chairman Gibbs, Ranking Member Napolitano, and members of the subcommittee. My name is Chris Korolowski, and I am pleased to serve as the Director of US EPA's Great Lakes National Program Office, or as we call it, GLNPO. I'm very pleased to be here this morning to discuss the remarkable progress that has been made under the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, or as we know it, the GLRI. The GLRI was launched in 2010 to accelerate efforts to protect and restore the largest system of fresh water in the world, to provide additional resources to make progress toward the most critical long-term goals for this important ecosystem. Since its inception, the GLRI has been a catalyst for unprecedented federal agency coordination to the GLRI Interagency Task Force and the GLRI Regional Working Group, both of which are led by EPA. This unprecedented coordination has led to unprecedented results. During the first 5 years of the initiative, GLRI resources have supplemented agency-based budgets to fund over 2,600 projects in 5 focus areas. Focus Area 1, toxic substances and areas of concern. Federal agencies and their partners delisted 3 areas of concern, what we call AOCs, and completed all the physical work that will lead to the delisting of 3 additional AOCs. That's a major change from the 25 years before the initiative, when only 1 AOC was cleaned up and delisted. It is our hope that we can keep this momentum going and ultimately achieve the delisting of all the remaining AOCs. Focus Area 2, invasive species. Federal agencies and their partners engaged in an unprecedented level of activity to prevent new introductions of invasive species, including Asian carp, into the Great Lakes ecosystem. Asian carp are a significant threat to the ecological health of the Great Lakes and its multi-billion-dollar sport fishery, and the GLRI provides support to the Asian Carp Regional Coordinating Committee to prevent bighead and silver carp from becoming established in the Great Lakes ecosystem. To date, monitoring has not found any established self-sustaining populations of silver or bighead carp in the Great Lakes. Nevertheless, the threat of Asian carp entering the Great Lakes continues, and the federal partners are eager to continue the work necessary to keep them out of the Great Lakes. Focus Area 3, nearshore health and non-point source pollution. Federal agencies and their partners targeted activities to reduce phosphorus runoff from farmland, which contributes to harmful algal blooms in western Lake Erie, Saginaw Bay, and Green Bay. Federal agencies use GLRI support to increase the number of acres of farmland enrolled in agricultural conservation programs in GLRI priority watersheds by more than 70%. Focus Area 4, habitat and wildlife protection and restoration. Federal agencies and their partners protected, restored, and enhanced more than 100,000 acres of wetlands and 48,000 acres of coastal, upland, and island habitat. Over 500 barriers were removed or bypassed in Great Lakes tributaries, enabling access by fish and other aquatic organisms to over 3,400 additional miles of river. These activities have accelerated the restoration of native fish and wildlife populations to self-sustaining levels. Focus Area 5, accountability, education, monitoring, evaluation, communication, and partnerships. Maybe you can see why we've changed the name in the next action plan. Federal agencies and their partners implemented Teach the Teacher activities and helped science teachers throughout the basin incorporate Great Lakes-specific material into their class curricula. But what's next? While the first 5 years of the GLRI have achieved remarkable progress, the federal agencies are already well underway implementing the GLRI Action Plan 2, which summarizes the actions that federal agencies will implement during fiscal years 2015 through 2019. These actions will build on restoration and protection work carried out under the first action plan, with a continuing focus on cleaning up AOCs, preventing and controlling invasive species, reducing nutrient runoff, and restoring habitat. We've modified Focus Area 5, and while we will continue to educate educators about the Great Lakes, Focus Area 5 now more directly incorporates an adaptive management approach into the GLRI's implementation. It also requires that GLRI projects take into account the need for resiliency in the face of climate change. Action Plan 2 is tighter and more focused than Action Plan 1, in large part because it incorporates suggestions for strengthening the GLRI that were contributed by the Great Lakes Advisory Board, US EPA Science Advisory Board, GAO, the Congressional Research Service, states, tribes, municipalities, and the general public. We are committed, devoted to improving the implementation of the initiative and have recently adopted new budgeting and planning processes that will provide for a closer working relationship between federal agencies and their state and tribal partners to ensure that appropriate projects are being prioritized and implemented. Thank you, Chairman Gibbs, Ranking Member Napolitano, and members of the committee. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. Mr. Gomez, the floor is yours.
Chairman Gibbs, Ranking Member Napolitano, and members of the subcommittee, good morning. I'm pleased to be here today to discuss our work on the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. The Great Lakes, as can be seen in the screens, is the largest system of fresh water in the world, and it provides economic and recreational benefits to millions of people. Decades of industrial and agricultural activities in the region have left a legacy of contamination. In addition, more than 180 non-native species have become established in the Great Lakes, some of which have caused extensive ecological and economic damage. The Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, as has been noted, was created to accelerate restoration by addressing issues such as water quality contamination and invasive species that continue to threaten the health of the Great Lakes ecosystem. The restoration is overseen by the Great Lakes Interagency Task Force and is chaired by the Environmental Protection Agency. So my statement today summarizes the results of our two reports on the topic. I'd like to make 3 key points related to the GLRI, the initiative. First, the funding and monitoring and reporting. 2, the process used to identify restoration work. And 3, information available about Great Lakes restoration project activities and results. The first point is that nearly all of the $1.68 billion in federal funds in fiscal years 2010 to 2014 have been allocated, and as it can be seen in the next slide, EPA and the task force agencies have made funding available to a range of recipients. We found that the Great Lakes Interagency Task Force agencies conduct restoration work themselves or by awarding funds to recipients through financial agreements such as grants, cooperative agreements, or contracts. EPA and the other 10 agencies have since expended $1.15 billion for over 2,100 projects. With regard to monitoring and reporting, we found that some information on restoration projects in EPA's database is inaccurate and may not be complete, which may prevent EPA from producing comprehensive or useful assessments of progress. We recommended that EPA capture more complete information on progress, which the agency did. In May of 2015, EPA replaced its old database with a new information system. Second, with regards to the process for selecting each agency's Great Lakes restoration work, this process has evolved since FY 2010 to emphasize interagency discussion. Originally, each agency made its own project and funding decisions in agreement with the task force. Now, multiple agency subgroups discuss and decide what work should be done. In fiscal year 2012, the task force created subgroups to discuss and identify work on 3 priority issues. The first issue was cleaning up severely degraded locations called areas of concern, which we've heard about already. Number 2 is preventing and controlling invasive species. And 3 is reducing nutrient runoff from agricultural areas. According to EPA, the focus on priority issues allowed for 2 areas of concern, the White Lake and Deer Lake areas in Michigan, to be targeted for accelerated cleanup. Both were delisted in 2014. Third, the task force has made some project information available to Congress and the public in 3 accomplishment reports and on its website. In addition, individual agencies collect information on activities and results, although this information is not collected and reported by EPA. Of the 19 projects that we reviewed, 8 reported results directly linked to restoration, such as improved methods for capturing sea lamprey, an invasive species that can kill up to 40 pounds of fish in its lifetime. The remaining 11 reported results that can be indirectly linked to restoration. That is, the results may contribute to restoration over time. In summary, the U.S. has committed enormous resources to restore the health of the Great Lakes ecosystem, with some progress. Currently, the restoration effort is in a period of transition as EPA and the task force agencies are using a new action plan, new subgroups to identify work and funding, and a new system to collect information on projects. Great Lakes restoration is an ongoing long-term effort. As such, it can benefit from continued congressional oversight. Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Napolitano, and members of the subcommittee, this completes my statement. I'd be pleased to answer questions.
Thank you. Mr. Kramer, the floor is yours. Well,
thank you and good morning. Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today to discuss the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative and the role of the Natural Resources Conservation Service within the U.S. Department of Agriculture. At NRCS, we know that voluntary private lands conservation is making a difference so that producers can sustain highly productive agriculture while making progress in protecting and improving a nation's natural resources. As acting regional conservationist for the Northeast region, I have the privilege of serving multiple states, including Ohio and even Michigan. I was raised on a farm in Northwest Ohio and graduated from The Ohio State University and with a bachelor's degree in agriculture. I've worked with NRCS in many capacities over 30 years, and I understand personally the conservation work my agency performs on private lands. This is a great time for conservation, and I welcome the opportunity to share this with you today. At NRCS, our conservationists work with state, local partners, as well as private organizations to deliver conservation, technical, and financial assistance to private landowners on a purely voluntary basis. In FY 2014, NRCS provided technical assistance to over 135,000 customers nationwide to address natural resource objectives on almost 60 million acres of farm, ranch, and forest land. NRCS technical and financial assistance is delivered to private landowners primarily through programs authorized by the Farm Bill, which include the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, the Conservation Stewardship Program, and the Ag Conservation Easement Program. This assistance helps producers plan and implement a variety of conservation practices such as cover crops, no-till, removing invasive species, and restoring wetlands. GLRI complements the significant investment made by NRCS within the Great Lakes region. Since 2010 and through 2014, GLRI has provided an additional $106 million in financial and technical assistance for conservation through this interagency agreement between NRCS and EPA. This was used to fund over 1,500 contracts with producers committing to implement conservation practices on over 300,000 acres within the basin, and to provide direct technical assistance to producers and landowners. NRCS works very closely with partners across the country and in the Great Lakes to maximize the federal investment and leverage that with non-federal contributions. Within the context of GLRI, between fiscal years 2010 and 2014, NRCS has leveraged about $7 million of the GLRI funds in agreements with partners to increase the impact of the federal investment in conservation. Mr. Chairman and members of the subcommittee, thank you for this opportunity to appear before you today. Conservation continues to be a solid investment in our nation's future. GLRI and other NRCS conservation programs and activities supported by Congress and the administration have demonstrated success to helping farmers, ranchers, and private forest owners achieve their production and operational goals in balance with nature, with the natural resource objectives, which provides benefits for the rural communities and the nation as a whole. I will be very happy to respond to any of your questions at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, and I'll start out. First, I want to thank Mr. Gomez for the report that we requested from your office, and it's very helpful. And I also recognize to the EPA that implementing some of the, you mentioned, and you also mentioned report that they implemented, I think, a big initiative before the report came out because of the report. And I want to just talk about that just for a minute, then I'll get another issue. But in your report, you talk about sharing future success and the challenges, and then the EPA, to address the issue, was about communication between the different agencies and states and wherever, and Mr. Kowalski created subgroups, my understanding of the way I read this, and so hopefully I think the intent is the subgroups are working together and communicating, because what we've heard, I think what Mr. Gomez in the study determined that, you know, one hand didn't know what the other hand was doing, kind of some of that. And do you want to elaborate a little bit about the functioning and the mechanism going forward with the subgroups? Turn your mic on.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Yes, I think what my colleague was referring to is that in the early years of GLRI, there was more of what we would call an allocation approach, where each agency would have its own projects that it would like to do, and then we would get together and talk about how much money should go to each agency to let them do their projects. And I'm simplifying, but that's the way it worked. I think come 2011, there was a consensus that, wait a minute, this isn't the best way to do this. This idea of having agencies sort of saying, we want to do these projects, was not, we think, as good as saying, let's all work together and figure out, looking at that ecosystem as a whole, what is the work that should be prioritized without regard to what this agency would like to accomplish or what that agency would like to accomplish. What should we, as the GLRI, accomplish and prioritize that? So that is what resulted in more of a, I think, much more of a collaborative approach. The subgroups were created to focus on what we agreed were priority areas, like AOCs.
Excuse me, the subgroups will consist of different agencies, the EPA, NOAA, and all.
So if I understand your question, when I think of a subgroup, I think of a subgroup within the regional working group. So the regional working group made up of EPA, NOAA, the Corps of Engineers. There are representatives from those agencies on those subgroups for, again, AOCs, invasive species, whatever it might be. Good. So that way, all the agencies were focusing on.
I think that's a good way to go forward, because I think that was one of the criticisms of the report. But to take that further, I see the Great Lakes Initiative Action Plan for 2015-19 does not include targets to measure any progress, and you know, if the EPA and the task force don't know how they get, without targets, how they're going to measure. You don't have any in this new action plan specific targets, goals. Am I understanding that right?
Mr. Chairman, no, there are targets in the action plan. If I can briefly. So in the new action plan, specifically, there are 5 focus areas, there are 12 objectives, there are 22 commitments, there are 34 measures of progress, and 10 of those measures of progress have annual targets, where we're actually trying to hit numbers. For example, number of AOCs where all the work has been completed, or the number of BUIs removed. So there are most definitely targets and objectives within Action Plan 2.
Okay. I want to ask a question about the, let's see what happened to me here. On the algae issue in western Lake Erie. Let's see. Yeah. Can you describe to the subcommittee how the EPA shows difference to the expertise of the other federal agencies for funding these activities? For instance, the EPA recognizes NOAA as the agency with the expertise related to harmful algae blooms. Why is it important that one agency not be given sole discretion over the GLRI activities?
Mr. Chairman, I think a number of the agencies have expertise in areas pertinent to harmful algal blooms. NOAA, for example, I think has great expertise in areas such as satellite monitoring and monitoring the bloom. In fact, after the Toledo drinking water crisis in 2014, we very quickly freed up about $12 million in GLRI funds to devote to, for example, some of that money went to NOAA so they could improve their ability to monitor algae and microcystin levels in the Toledo area. We provided money to USGS to do more stream monitoring to measure the amount of phosphorus getting into Lake Erie, which USGS is extremely good at. NRCS was provided with additional funds because our colleagues at NRCS are very good at getting money.
Last question, I want to just go to Mr. Kramer. What will it take to reduce the amount of nutrients entering the Great Lakes to shrink or prevent the algae blooms that have occurred in the last few years?
That's a good question. Eliminating it, I don't know if that's going to be possible. I think we have an opportunity here to reduce the impact, maybe the duration. Just since 2010 through 2013, the GLRI funding that was provided to NRCS has reduced, we estimate, has reduced the nitrogen entering into the Great Lakes by over 3.5 million pounds and over 600 pounds of phosphorus. Now, the algal blooms still develop. There are many other sources. It's not just agriculture. Yeah. There's residential, there's commercial, there's what we call legacy phosphorus, which there is phosphorus sitting in the Lake Erie, in the sediment on the ground or under the surface. And turbidity, water, air temperatures, water depth, sunlight all have an impact on whether that comes up.
Are we noticing more dissolved phosphorus compared to maybe phosphorus attached to the sediment? Is dissolved phosphorus more of an issue than it was in previous years?
I can't answer that. I don't know that we've made that distinction,
okay.
Congressman. But we have reduced. And we're looking at other methods and processes. We do know that a lot of the dissolved phosphorus gets out in the tile.
Pardon?
It gets out in the tile,
okay.
through the farms, and we're working on. As of right now, Ohio has just, with GRLI assistance from GRLI funding, entered into agreement with the Ohio Farm Bureau to do demonstration farms.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of different things going on.
Yeah, I know the Ohio Farm Bureau, I think, put up $1 million towards that. Just my last question, if I yield to my ranking member. On these programs, can you kind of elaborate voluntary versus regulatory, mandatory? What's the best fit? What's the best way to address this issue?
Well, for me, it's voluntary, at least on when it comes to private landowners, private agricultural farms. I think the voluntary approach works. One good example of why it works, and this is not just in the Western Lake Erie Basin or within the Great Lakes, but across the country, every single one of the programs that NRCS offers is well oversubscribed. We have backlogs forever. People want to participate. They want to put conservation on their ground, and they want some assistance to do that. And we've shown that it does work.
And I will concur with that, being a farmer. And I would also, just closing, I would say that, farmers drink the water first. I mean, it's
right.
on the land, that comes out of their wells or wherever they're getting it. And it's just critical, and they want to do the best for the environment. We've seen that with best management practices, no-till, a bunch of things that's happening. And my concern has been, especially with the WOTUS rule, when you come down with a heavy hammer, at some point you just overburden with red tape and bureaucracy. They throw hands up in the air and they're not going to do what they would have done. Right. And I think I'm really concerned with the WOTUS rule that we could actually go backwards in water quality for the strides we've made. So it's time to yield to my ranking member.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And on that note, Mr. Kramer, one of the things that some pilot project in California is looking at is on-site new technology that might clean the runoff, recycle the runoff right from the farms. Is there anything being looked at or touted or at least considered as part of the assistance to the farmers?
The one thing that we're doing that it's not actually cleaning, but it's what we call edge of field monitoring, which we now do within NRCS. That allows on the farm so they can monitor the nutrient loads that are coming off that farm. We have looked at things such as bioreactors and things of that nature that in the ground subsurface to clean it. But what you're referring to, I'm not aware of, but it's a possibility. We could look at those different methods and processes. And what NRCS would typically do is take a look at something like that. If it provides merit, we can try it on a pilot basis.
Well, I'll check out, but
Yeah.
it was supposed to be a pilot in Bakersfield by the Costner group that did the British petroleum spill.
Okay.
So that might bring some change. In the algae bloom, isn't probably the temperature also responsible for the creation of a lot more of the algae?
Yes. The water temperature, air temperature. I think we avoided it a lot this year because we didn't have as many duration of hot, humid days, and we had some winds that kind of stirred the lake a little bit. At least that's from the reports from NOAA that we received on a pretty regular basis.
Yeah. And I noticed, I'm sorry, but my time is running, and I want to be sure that I take in all the questions that I have in mind. But in the runoff, going back to the runoff, the fact that there are more effective ways of partners working together to combat the runoff, what else is being done to be able to help farmers and the ability to restrict the amount of runoff into the streams and rivers?
Well, I think, one of the big things that we do is it's not just controlling the runoff, it's what's being applied.
Okay.
Only apply what you absolutely need through our nutrient management standard specification, which is a very widely used practice throughout the basin and throughout the Great Lakes. So what's being delivered on the field should be controlled first, and a lot of producers are doing that.
Of course, there's a lot of great results, but some are saying that the GLRI has gone after the low-hanging fruit, and what remains is going to be a bigger challenge. Can you explain?
I believe maybe it's kind of what I'd referred to before. We have developed there's a conservation effects assessment project that we've done, and our scientists have estimated that if for Western Lake Erie Basin alone, if we treated every single ag farm, we would still only reduce the nutrient by 40%. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that maybe what that statement is referring to is that even in doing everything that we could do, there's still so many other factors involved that we're not going to be able to get to.
Do you have an idea of how many farms are voluntary partners? Is it a percentage? Is it because you mentioned it was voluntary?
Yeah. I don't have that with me, but we could provide that.
It would be nice to know.
The number of the producers in the Great Lakes that are actually that are working with us. Yes, we could provide that information.
Thank you.
Yes.
Mr. Korleski, your testimony notes that Action 2 incorporates fresh approaches. Can you describe the science-based adaptive management framework you plan to use, and when do you feel it's going to be implemented?
Yes, Ranking Member. The adaptive management approach, I think adaptive management is a fancy way of saying learn as we go. Learn from your mistakes. Learn from what works. Learn from what doesn't work.
But who looks at those?
What's that?
Who determines what works and what isn't working?
The agencies implementing the projects.
Okay.
So what, under the action plan, the way this should work is when projects are implemented, the agencies implementing them should look at project results and look at project impacts and look at what worked. If you did a project, if we tried something as a pilot project and it didn't work, we have to remember that, and we have to say, yeah, that didn't work. Don't do that.
But what is turnaround time? Don't forget, government works very slowly.
Well, we do adaptive management really over the course of 2 different cycles. So we do an action plan every 5 years. So one of the things that we do is when we're drafting a new action plan, as we did in the second action plan, we looked about what worked, what didn't work, what kind of targets did we have in the first action plan that were not realistic, that we didn't have the technology or we didn't have good measurements, and come up with a better action plan.
Okay.
But I think more importantly, adaptive management is also looked at on an annual level when we're actually doing project selection, because the agencies essentially get together and look at the potential universe of projects that could be done and say, okay, given what we know, where should we prioritize?
Do you share that information with other areas that might have similar problems?
For example,
Your
geographic areas,
Yes.
like the Chesapeake, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Because that would save some time and some people having to reinvent the wheel. The other question I have recently, actually yesterday, there was a news release in regard to Line 5, the pipeline. And the question, of course, comes up about, according to the University of Michigan, it's the worst possible location for an oil spill. This is crude coming out of Canada, or transfer being out of Canada. You're aware of that, I'm sure. And some of the challenges that they may face in winter if there is a spill. And apparently there was a winter spill test that was very challenging. Is there a way to be able to understand, because I understand Senator Stabenow and Congressman Peters have a bill to ban crude oil shipments through that region?
Well, Ranking Member, if I can tell you about EPA's role, maybe that will help clarify.
Okay.
So in Region 5, where we are, our response office, our Superfund program, is deeply involved in planning contingency work, at trying to anticipate what could go wrong, in working with PHMSA, states, tribal nations, to again make sure
I know, but that was in summer. The program was looking at the transportation in summer. But what about winter? Because there is a challenge there.
Ranking Member, I confess I'm not that familiar with the challenges that occurred in the winter exercise, so that's something we can follow up on. But I do know that EPA and the Coast Guard would be the first line of response in the event of any.
Apparently there's another test being held early next year. I'd like to be able to know what the results of that, because of the protection for that area.
Yes, Ranking Member, we will be sure to note that.
Thank you. And then, of course, there is the past 5 years, the program has improved the quality in the region and addressed a lot of the environmental problems. How is GLRI prepared to produce the same result in the next 5?
I'm sorry, could you repeat your question?
How is the GLRI prepared to produce the same results in the next 5 years as it has in the past 5 years, considering the scope of the problems?
Ranking Member, I think we actually hope to do better in the next 5 years.
Based on your experience?
Based on the adaptive management approach and learning from what we learned the first 5 years. Also the fact, as I mentioned earlier, the agencies, I think, are coordinating much better on identifying priorities. So it's not just an agency by agency, let us do what we want. I think that's going to achieve better and greater results. So I think we've learned a lot and we're working together more closely.
Thank you. And now I'll refer back to my chairman. I have one more question, Mr. Gomez. I'll hold.
Mr. Ribble.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks for being here. I appreciate the work that you're all working on and doing this. I happen to live in the lower Fox River watershed in northeast Wisconsin. I live on the shoreline. And so I've been able to see in real time some of the improvements that are actually happening. And Mr. Korleski, can GLRI funds be awarded to support partnerships between water systems and the agriculture industry? And by that I mean you've got both point source and non-point source issues, and so can there be some combination of partnership there, and the funds be used in an equal partnership with them together?
So, Mr. Chairman, Representative, yes, I think the short answer is yes. It would depend on how the project was organized and who was doing what. But one of the great things about the GLRI is that there is flexibility in terms of how we award and provide money. So I would think that yes, depending on what was being proposed and who was involved, that is something that we could do and we could certainly look at.
So it's a bit of a, kind of a exploration of ideas, and you're looking at the best ideas, and if someone comes up with some type of program that makes sense to you all, that would be something you would take a look at.
Mr. Chairman, Representative, absolutely. The one thing that we do not pretend to have is all the answers, and we don't pretend that we've got everything down to a science. We don't, and we are open to new ideas.
Are the hypoxic zones in Green Bay similar to the ones in Lake Erie?
So my understanding, I'm more familiar with the Lake Erie area, partly because, frankly, I'm from Ohio.
Yeah.
But I think the problem is the same. I think the magnitude of the blooms in the western basin of Lake Erie have been greater. That's not to minimize what's happening up in either the Saginaw Bay or the Fox River area. But the problem, we believe, is caused by the same issue, which is too much phosphorus getting into the water, and we think the solutions are essentially the same. Try to figure out how to reduce phosphorus, both dissolved and in other forms, from getting into the water.
Yeah. Basically keeping the nutrient on the soil and not in the water.
Where they're needed.
Ultimately where you need to go.
Where they're needed, yes.
Yeah, and Mr. Kramer, first of all, I want to commend the work that your agency has been doing in Wisconsin and Lower Fox.
Thank you.
One of the things I hear repeatedly from county executives in the entire Lake Winnebago, Lower Fox watershed, which drains into Green Bay, is that they actually could use more conservation agents, whether they're agents that are on the ground at the county level or with your agency. Can GLRI funds be used by county executives to increase agency partnerships with working with agriculture?
Yes, they can. And as a matter of fact, NRCS has utilized some of the GLI funding in just such that way. In my oral, and I believe written testimony, alluded to the agreements that to extend the federal contributions. We can enter into agreements with soil and water districts, state departments of agriculture, and others to put more boots on the ground, more folks out there on the field, and we have done that throughout various areas throughout the Great Lakes.
Yeah, because in this watershed, the one I'm speaking of here in northeast Wisconsin, there's 71 CAFOs, large farming operations, one of the highest density in the country, and around 1,500 to 1,600 smaller dairies in this. There's a lot of animals in this area. And reaching out to that many individual dairy farmers is a tough task with the number of bodies there. But what I have experienced both with your agency and working with Wisconsin dairy industry is that they're anxious to start solving this problem. They want to be part of the solution. But for some of the smaller dairies, it does become an issue of resources. Are funds available for some type of joint sharing of equipment? For example, direct injection of manure into the soil as opposed to just mass spreading it using water as a carrying agent, but that equipment's $80, $90, $100,000. Could it be shared by a county over a large area of land so that multiple farmers would have access to that type of equipment through the grant system?
Yeah, typically the NRCS program, specifically EQIP, would not actually purchase a piece of equipment. But what it would do is provide an incentive to those farmers where they could go in, if they want to go out and purchase that together to share it, they could use those funds to do that. What we're looking for is the activity. What are they actually doing on the farm? And we're paying an incentive for that activity. Now, if that means they have to get a piece of equipment or modify it, that's fine. But we definitely stray from using the tax dollars to actually purchase a piece of equipment, which may not be there in 2 to 3 years, or it might get sold down the road.
Sure.
But there are ways to do to get to where you're
Yeah,
going.
because when you look at the technologies available with low-till equipment, with direct injection of
Yes.
manure, the things that will actually keep the nutrient in the field,
Absolutely.
those bear a fair amount of cost.
Yes, they do.
And then my final question, then, Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back. Mr. Gomez, in your report, did you guys look at the efficiency of the funding? In other words, how much money is going to just the administration of the fund itself versus how much is actually getting to specific projects?
Sure. So we did look at, I mentioned earlier, we looked at 19 projects in detail. And in those projects, we did look at the amount of money that was going to indirect cost. And we found that that varied from 0 to 37%. In the cases where it was 0, it was because the entities hadn't established an indirect rate yet with the EPA. Those that were higher, those tend to be universities that charge a higher indirect rate. So that's the way we looked at it in terms of the projects, and we looked at, as I said, 19.
Because obviously anything we can do to reduce the indirect costs so that more of it actually gets to the ground is going to be a better use of this taxpayer funding. Thank you, and Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Ms. Norton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have been listening to this very impressive collaboration, which apparently has bipartisan support even here. I note that this Great Lakes restoration effort is not authorized, but it has been funded. It appears that the federal government is the major actor pressing forward, using its full expertise with working groups and federal agencies, and one is left to wonder if other areas, somebody mentioned Chesapeake, for example, if this kind of collaboration and effort driven by the federal government, the EPA and other agencies, is occurring in other watersheds? Or are we hearing a unique effort that has not been exported? Perhaps Korleski, Mr. Kramer might be able to speak to that.
So, Mr. Chairman, Representative, I do know that we, for example, have had conversations with the Chesapeake Bay program, which has problems similar. They're different, but they have nutrient problems that show up in different ways. And not that long ago, we spent a couple hours on the phone with them sharing our practices about what we were trying to do to reduce nutrient loadings into water bodies, and that was very helpful. There is a Chesapeake Bay program within EPA as a separate line item in the budget, I believe. So we have worked with them. We're aware of other geographic programs which are receiving funding from EPA. But
are the results that you attain repeated anywhere else? Or are we talking about a unique effort? I understand the huge importance, massive importance of this major water supply, the Great Lakes. I'm trying to find out whether it's unique or not, particularly since it's driven by the federal government.
I know that federal dollars are being directed to other programs.
That I know. I'm looking at the impressive results that have been attained here. Mr. Gomez, do you have any notion of whether we're talking about a unique effort, completely federally driven, it seems to me, by one of the great watersheds? You couldn't do without it.
Sure.
So anywhere else?
What I can mention is GAO has actually looked at ecosystem restoration efforts around the country. It was mentioned already, Chesapeake Bay. We've looked there, and they have a slightly different organizational structure. The state there is a partner with the federal agencies, and other entities are also key partners. The Great Lakes is slightly organized differently. We've looked also at the Florida Everglades restoration efforts in years past, where again it's very much managed by the state, the feds, and tribes. I mean, the Great Lakes is obviously
different here. This is the federal government is the driver here, isn't it?
Yes, correct.
And one of the problems in the Chesapeake Bay is, I don't know, it's the same huge number of states, but where they are the leadership with water that crosses state lines, it doesn't appear to me that we get results anywhere in the ballpark of what we're seeing here with this federally driven project.
Representative, if I may, one of the things that I would emphasize is that while the GLRI funding is federal funding and the Interagency Task Force and the Regional Working Group are made up of the federal departments, a large reason for the success in the Great Lakes Basin is because we do partner very closely with states.
How did you get the states who obviously have different interests, just as they do in the Chesapeake Bay, to collaborate except for the force of the federal government, its money, and its expertise behind this project?
Representative, I think it's because they realized the GLRI brought an opportunity for significant change and significant improvement. An opportunity for significant
what brought
change.
it, the Great Lakes? What did you say brought this opportunity?
The GLRI and the states recognizing that through our grants and providing them with funds and working with them, that jointly we could get a tremendous amount of work done.
I think it was federal leadership, Mr. Korleski. I think it's very difficult when you say to the Chesapeake Bay, oh, you 9 states, I mean, there's something like that. You get together. This is one of the great wonders of the world. And together, figure out what to do about it. You have your own budgets, your own priorities. And everyone speaks about how extraordinary this is. But what you don't have is the kind of leadership that the federal agencies have given to this extraordinary project with extraordinary results. And you've not been able to name a single other project which has had similar results. And I would, with knowing nothing, I would hazard a guess that it's because it hasn't had the same federal leadership that this project has had. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Nolan.
Thank you, Mr. I want to thank Chairman Gibbs and Ranking Member Napolitano for holding this hearing. Thank the witnesses for being here. First of all, I want to commend you all for the work that you're doing and the importance of it. With no pun intended, I do have a couple areas of concern myself that are unrelated to pollution of the Great Lakes. One of them is what appears to be a rather abrupt shift in programming and in funding. And I'll start with you, Mr. Korleski. You talked about the significance of the unprecedented coordination, and I applaud you for that, the unprecedented results, and I applaud you for that. And you use that word, unprecedented coordination, a number of times, and I applaud you for that. My two concerns with regard to the shift in programming and funding relates, forgive me for being parochial, but to the Duluth area. We're proud to have eliminated our first area of concern on the St. Louis River there. But based on the first 5 years of funding, where we had received $4.5 million, there's been a dramatic reduction of almost 3/4 down to 1.2. And based on the first 5 years of work, it had been expected that we would have eliminated all of our areas of concern by 2019, which of course will not happen at this point in time. And that is an area of concern for me, and I'd like you to address that. And then secondly, we've heard from the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency and from the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources, and they, like you, were celebrating the unprecedented coordination and collaboration. And what I believe they referred to as flexible dollars. And now I see that funding for staffing will be restricted to project specific. And there's a concern that I have and others have that will reduce the ability for that kind of collaboration and cooperation between state and county and local on a broader basis. So if you could address both of those concerns, it would be much appreciated.
Mr. Chairman, Representative. Yes, there is no question that in this latest funding cycle, the money that we were able to provide to states for what I would describe as capacity funding was less. And the main reason for that was because the first determination of how much states, including Minnesota, would get as capacity funds was put together back in 2010 when GLRI was funded at a level of $475 million. That was a 5-year allocation, if you will, and that was based on the belief that there would be $475 million. When that during that 5-year period, we did not reduce that annual allocation, even though the amount dropped from $475 million to roughly $300 million a year over the last 4 years. We did not change the allocation during that 5 years. When that grant expired after 5 years and it was time to renegotiate a new grant with the states, we were looking at what was essentially a 37% reduction in the GLRI if we were looking at a $300 million level. If we were looking at a $250 million level that was proposed, that was a 48% reduction compared to what we had back in 2010. That was the main reason why we had to reduce the amount of capacity funding for the states. Your second comment, which I think I'm very glad you raised it, the issue of this project-specific funding. One of the things that we're trying to emphasize—
Well, staffing for project-specific, yeah.
Exactly. One of the things that we're trying to do is make a clearer distinction between funding for capacity and funding for projects. I'll give you an example. Capacity funding for us would be money given to a state, for example, to allow staff to attend meetings, to allow them to travel, allow them to do overall budgeting over their plan as a whole. Project-specific work would be, for example, staff working on a specific AOC-related project. And one of the things that we've tried to convey to the states is we want them to start putting their staffing needs in their project applications, rather than just relying on capacity grants to take all that into account. So in other words, we think there should be an appropriate amount of capacity funding to do overall planning, but if staff is going to be working on a specific AOC project, our advice to the states is build that number into your project application, build that cost into the project application, and then that will be treated as part of the project. We would intend to fund it, assuming we had the money, but it gets us away from this, is there enough capacity money to do both capacity and project-specific work? The reason we want to do that is because we think if we can more clearly identify that when money has gone to specific projects, it just gives us a better ability to account for that money.
Well, I appreciate that, but having staffing for greater coordination and collaboration, as you were celebrating and I celebrate, it gives the regional groups a greater capacity to adjust as well, depending on what the county state priorities are and what they might want to fund. And so I appreciate you're trying to take a look at a bigger picture, but if the city or the state or the county wants to do something differently but significant, with that coordination, that collaboration, that's how you know about that, and that's how you can adjust to it and make that things happen. Well, I'm about out of time here, but I did want to thank you very much for all the great work you do. This is really important, and I lament the fact, Mr. Chairman, that we celebrate, that we might be able to come up with $300 million, when it's, darn near $200 million short of what we're used to. So, I think we should look at trying to find some ways to authorize a greater expenditure here for this important project. Lastly, Mr. Kramer, and just a quick answer, you talked about if we did away with all the agricultural pollution, we'd reduce it like 40%, and you alerted to the other sources. Do you have any statistics on exactly how much comes from municipal and industry and other? And if you do, could you share those with us?
No, Congressman, I do not. We can check with some of our scientists to see if they have pulled some of that information, but I'm not aware of that. We were just looking at the agricultural and what reductions in phosphorus and nutrients and nitrogen we would see from all of the treatment on all of the ag land.
Well, if you come across any of that, take a look, would you please? Let us know. Maybe we could have our staff look at that too, and that would be helpful to us in understanding the scope of this problem. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Before we excuse the panel, I know I have one question. I think my ranking member has a question, but I guess, Mr. Kowalski, this really go to you with your background as former Ohio EPA director and in your role now. There's been a lot of discussion about the impact of open lake disposal for dredging and the legacy issues. Can you just give us your thoughts of what the impact might be on, the legacy issues of phosphorus with the open lake disposal? Mike.
The green button was on. You fooled me. Mr. Chairman, that's a great question. So we know that open lake disposal is a huge issue, for example, in the Cuyahoga River area. There, the issue is not so much phosphorus or nutrient.
It's PBS, PCBs.
Exactly,
Yeah.
PCBs. So that's one kind of issue you have. Out in Toledo, where there's a much larger amount of sediment that needs to be dredged, there's some speculation that could, by the open lake disposal, that material could exacerbate the phosphorus problem. I've never heard anyone point to any scientific certainty or as close as you can get on science. What we're thinking about, one of the big issues that we're thinking about with regard to open lake disposal is, in general, I think most people would prefer if it didn't go into the lake. The problem is, and the problem that we want to work on with our partners is finding beneficial uses for that material, whether it's filling in old basements, whether it's for stockpiling for soil, for gardens, whatever that is, we think that beneficial use is critical.
Just a comment a little bit on the Cuyahoga-Cleveland issue. I think they've made significant progress on finding beneficial uses. The filling in the basements of the land bank program there. The bedload interceptor, I don't know if you're familiar with that, that started this spring, going up the Cuyahoga River upstream and collecting a lot of sediment before it gets more in the contaminated legacy areas. So I'm hopeful that we're coming. The good thing about that issue there, the amount of cubic yards is a lot less than what we have in the Toledo-Maumee area.
Yes.
And that's highly laden with phosphorus. And I know that you said there's no scientific evidence. I didn't know if there's any thought of trying to do more studies. I know there's been comments made by certain elected officials in Ohio that they put it out in the lake, and Lake Erie is so shallow out there. That's one of the major problems, issues, challenges, and it kind of gets washed back into it. And you think that could be a hypothesis as a fact that maybe it's adding to the legacy issues? Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, going back to my days at Ohio EPA, I wrote a very heartfelt letter to the Corps of Engineers expressing concerns with in-lake disposal in the Toledo area because of the volume of the amount. During that time, I talked to a lot of technical people, scientists, about is there any, I won't even call it conclusive, but hard evidence that this is going to exacerbate either the phosphorus problem, the nutrient problem, through any mechanism. Yeah. And I could not get a clear answer. So I think I'm relying on what many other people are relying on, which is it's such a large amount of sediment, there must be a better use for it. But finding that use
it should really be an asset instead of a liability.
That's the way we would look at it.
This is my last quick question. The Western Lake Erie Basin, so shallow, I think, 30 feet or wherever it is, compared to maybe up in Mr. Ribble's area at Lake Superior, I've heard 700 feet, or I don't know. It's very deep. So open lake disposal and depths like that, common sense will tell you that maybe it's an issue because the depth is. Would you concur with that?
I think that, Mr. Chairman, if you're talking about the Western Basin, where 20 feet, I think is somewhere around 20, 25 feet, I think is the average depth. Okay. If you're dumping in roughly a million cubic yards, I don't recall what the exact volume is, I can see the argument that, well, okay, you're certainly just keeping this shallow. But again, I would be reluctant to assert with any certainty that I know that that's causing either exacerbating the nutrient problem or any other problem. Yeah. The one thing I would say, and what I would point out several years ago, though, is the question I would have is how much are you redredging that you've already dredged? And I raised that issue back in 2010 when I believe this came up, and wasn't able to get a clear answer then either.
It'd be nice if there's some way you put markers on there so you actually track that, huh?
Yes, yes it would.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Gomez, excuse me. The GAO's report July 2015 indicated EPA should improve its monitoring reporting data. So before your report came out, they changed it to the EAGLE system. How is that improving, and will that satisfy?
So that's a good question. And right, as we were doing our work, we had recommendations for EPA to either decide to do away with its old system or improve its old system. The new system that they have, which you refer to as EAGLE, when we were doing our work, EPA was still finalizing it, so we haven't looked at it to see how it's working. We do think that it's...
When will you know, though?
Well, so we're going to be tracking the development of it. So as EPA, I believe that EPA is supposed to allow data entry at the beginning of fiscal year 2016.
So not until next year.
So once that happens, we were also interested to make sure, I know one thing that EPA has done already is restricted who inputs information into that system so that now you get more consistent information. In the old system, everybody, I believe, who was a grantee or was an entity receiving funds could input information. EPA has also improved the guidance that they've provided.
Is it project specific?
Yes, so it would be project specific, and they're restricting who can do it. It's just federal agencies, and they have better guidance. So we'd like to see how that goes and can report back on it.
How long will it take you after you review that data next year?
Well, we'd have to wait at least until there's some data entry. So once the federal agencies enter the information, I would give it a year for us to see how well it's working.
How often will you track that data?
Well, we at this point, because we didn't make a recommendation, because since EPA was taking action, we would probably have to look at the effort again, so we'd get a request from you that says, go back in, see how the system is working, and be more than happy to do that. Mm-hmm. So, the one thing that I just wanted to add, which hasn't been brought up, and I think it's important to mention, it's the issue of nutrient runoff. And that is, in the work that we did, as we talked to stakeholders, they told us about an issue that really isn't addressed by the GLRI, and that is the issue of inadequate stormwater and wastewater infrastructure that leads to runoff.
Water treatment plants.
So that is a big area. We refer to it sometimes as urban runoff. I think it's maybe been referred to it. But that's an area that stakeholders said is key. It contributes to nutrient runoff, and it's not addressed really by the GLRI. Obviously, EPA has the state revolving funds, and each state then provides money.
What would provide the ability to be able to not control, but actually modify how it's being treated and who's treating it?
So in a lot of cases, what happens with this infrastructure, it's just one infrastructure. So in heavy rains, the overflow just goes into streams, lakes, rivers, instead of the treatment plant. So it's an issue that a lot of places, and you'll probably hear from the second panel, it's an issue that a lot of cities across the country and towns face.
So are you looking at the improvement or upgrading of the water treatment plants to be able to accommodate that?
That is one option, yes. So others are
Is that being considered?
So under the GLRI, one of the things that we are focusing on is controlling stormwater runoff through something called green infrastructure. We don't spend, and we are prohibited from spending GLRI money on hard infrastructure like wastewater treatment plants.
Okay.
We can't do that. But we are very well aware that stormwater runoff can cause health hazards. You can't swim in a beach because of E. coli, whatever the problem may be. So we have devoted a considerable amount of funds, and we're continuing to focus on this concept of green infrastructure, which can be as simple as where you've got runoff running down into a beach area, you construct a little we would call it a swale, a little ditch. You put plants in it that absorb the runoff, they filter the runoff, so before it actually gets into the lake, it's essentially been filtered, and you've captured a lot of the E. coli. That kind of project we can do, and we've had 2 rounds now of what we've called green infrastructure funding, and we plan to continue.
But wouldn't it make sense to be able to assist the treatment plants, be able to upgrade or expand, to be able to handle in times when you have exceeding amounts of rain?
Well, and again, part of the green infrastructure, the intent is to capture some of the water before it gets into the concrete stormwater system. By reducing that amount of stormwater getting into the system, it can reduce the likelihood of overflows. But again, the way GLRI is structured, we can't offer money to fix or update treatment plants themselves.
Okay, well, it might be something you might want to consider in the future. Now, you mentioned their issue, I think it was Mr. Kramer on quagga mussel infestation, because somebody did. Was it you, Mr. Korleski? On quagga mussel, because that's very costly to reduce or clean the intake valves and all the systems that are affected. What have you found is how would I say, working to be able to reduce the impact it has on those intakes?
So, Ranking Member, probably the latest news is that within the past year, there has been and I'm not recalling the term, I'll call it a quaggicide or a zebricide. There's been essentially a pesticide that has been found to be effective against drycinid mussels, which are the quagga and zebra mussels.
And zebra. Mm-hmm.
Now, and the information thus far shows that it can have an impact on them without impacting other, for example, native mussels.
Would you send to this committee, subcommittee, information on that? Because I'm sure some of our entities would be glad to know what it is that is successful in that area.
We would be happy to do so. The one thing I would point out is that thus far it's only been tried on a pilot level. It's only been tried at a pilot level.
Okay, now California has many problems with water. As you well know, we're facing drought. But is there any recommendations you have for California?
Ranking Member Napolitano, the only thing I can say is I think with each passing month and year, whether we live in California or we live in the Great Lakes Basin, we all realize that water is precious.
Correct.
And it's being recognized as being more precious, and we have to protect it. And if we're going to be, whether it's on one extreme, a drought where we have to do a better job of conserving water, or on the other extreme, you're seeing more intensive storms dumping a large amount of water in a short period of time, we have to plan for that.
But what I find more interesting is the partnerships that were forged to be able to make this happen. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
I want to thank the panel for coming in today and sharing your thoughts and expertise. And I think it's found out from the report and our hearing today that collaboration, working with all the different agencies and the private entities, and Mr. Gomez, you raised a good point about the hard infrastructure and the combined sewer overflows and all that issue. And we did put it in the WRDA bill last time, a WIFIA program, a pilot program, to try to help supplement the state revolving funds to address the hard issues. But also on the green side of things, as a farmer, I can tell you, I've seen amazing things happen with buffer strips, grass waterways. The filtration process on nature is really amazing. And so there's some things that can be incorporated that make a lot of sense. But I think we know what work and the work of the NRCS and all that we do there on a voluntary basis, working with all the farmers and agricultural sector out there is very important. And moving forward, I think we can make some good progress. So again, thank you for coming in today, and you're excused, and we'll bring up the second panel in just. Welcome to the House Transportation Infrastructure Subcommittee of Water Resource and Environment. And today on our panel, too, we have Mr. John Allen. He's the acting chair of the Great Lakes Commission. The Honorable John Dickett, the mayor of the city of Racine, Wisconsin. Mr. Ed Wolking, Jr., the executive director of Great Lakes Metro Chambers Coalition. Mr. Doug Bastidger, director of the Ohio Agribusiness Association. And Mr. Chad Lord, he's policy director of the Healing Our Waters, the Great Lakes Coalition. Welcome, and Mr. Allen, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chairman Gibbs, Ranking Member Napolitano, for holding this hearing today. The Great Lakes Restoration Initiative remains a top priority for the Great Lakes Commission and its member states, and we appreciate your oversight and your interest in it. I serve as Director of Michigan's Office of the Great Lakes, but I'm here today as Chairman of the Great Lakes Commission. I moved from acting to chair just the other day. Commission was formed by 8 states in 1955 to provide a common voice on behalf of the 8 states on important Great Lakes issues. The Great Lakes are a great national treasure and a vital economic interest. They provide us with multiple benefits, but most profoundly, they constitute the social and cultural backdrop for nearly 40 million U.S. and Canadian citizens who live within that basin. The lakes are a significant and growing component of our regional and national economies. Restoring and properly caring for the Great Lakes is a long-standing and a bipartisan priority for our region's leaders, including my boss, Governor Rick Snyder. The focus has continued through Democratic and Republican administrations and enjoys broad-based support among states, tribes, cities, businesses, industries, and with conservation groups. The Commission and its member states have been deeply engaged with the GLRI since its inception. The states actually helped formulate some of the original GLRI focus areas, and state staff are supporting many of the projects and actions underway, either directly on projects or assisting local partners across each of our states. The state's contributions are vital to the program's success. The GLRI is a strong and well-managed program that is targeting resources at our most serious problems and areas. It's supported by sound science, and it's guided by an action plan with important performance metrics. The GLRI has stimulated impressive progress over the past 5 years. Noteworthy highlights include actions to thwart bighead and silver carp from invading the Great Lakes, targeted nutrient reductions in watersheds contributing to dangerous algae blooms, and of course the cleanups of the AOCs we've been talking about. Really, one of the most striking impacts, I think, has been in this area of AOCs, where the GLRI, together with state resources and local resources and capacities, is enabling communities to clear their legacy contamination and to revitalize degraded waterfronts, transforming them into once again, valuable assets. Last year, we're very proud in Michigan that we were able to delist 2 of those AOCs. And it's really not the federal government that I want to think about and the states, but it's 30 years of people in communities that worked hard towards that end. So I want to recognize how important that the communities have been. It is important, and they feel the benefit of that progress. I will say, though, that it would not have been possible under any circumstance without GLRI to promote that activity. Communities have been waiting for decades for this kind of progress. While the GLRI predominantly focuses on ecosystem improvements, it is also generating important cultural, social, and economic benefits for the region and the nation and for our communities, and should be recognized and celebrated. Businesses, jobs, wildlife, and people are returning to waterfronts across the region that were once written off, ignored, forgotten about. Performance metrics really cannot fully capture this evolution as much as we work towards that end, but it is profoundly important for local economies and for our quality of life and really human well-being. There is room for improvement, however. You've seen some of that in our written testimony. The Commission's specific recommendations have been provided there. However, I'll just highlight a few of the following, things that we've already touched on, I believe. First, we really urge improved coordination, consultation, and engagement with the states. We really see ourselves as more than just stakeholders. We have sovereign authorities, we have regulatory responsibilities, we have direct connections to communities, and really work hand in hand with them and with our federal partners as well. We see this as collateral partnerships. Second, we need to sustain state capacity to support an effective federal-state partnership. We need to ensure that federal programs are integrated with state priorities and work plans, and we must maintain state capacity towards that end. Third, we must maintain long-term monitoring to assess progress, success, and as we've heard, to adapt over time. Finally, we need to better target our nutrient reduction actions to prioritize watersheds that contribute to the formation of harmful algae. While some of that coordination is directly beyond GLRI, it's in other programs and other federal programs that can be aligned at both the federal and the state interests, and the states can play a very unique role in helping that coordination amongst multiple programs. In conclusion, the Commission reiterates 2 priorities for Congress: sustained funding for Great Lakes restoration. We really need to continue the progress that we've seen continue the efforts that really have been happening for decades with great success recently, and ultimately to pass formal legislation authorizing the GLRI. The GLRI has generated real progress that would not have occurred without it, and refinements such as the one in our testimony can build upon those success. The Commission and its member states urge Congress to support the program, and we pledge, as states and through the Great Lakes Commission, our continued partnership towards the restoration of the Great Lakes. Thank you.
Mayor, welcome.
Thank you.
The floor is yours.
Mr. Chairman, good morning. And committee members, good morning. Ranking Member Napolitano, good morning. And all of you watching on TV land, good morning. I'm Mayor John Dickert, Mayor of Racine, Wisconsin. We are a city between Milwaukee and Chicago on Lake Michigan, about 80,000 folks. I sit as the Vice Chair of the Metro Economies Committee with the U.S. Conference of Mayors and also serve on their Mayor's Water Council. I was the past chair of the binational Great Lakes St. Lawrence Cities Initiative, and I serve on Governor Walker's Coastal Management Commission and was president of the Urban Alliance in Wisconsin. What does this all mean? It means I'm a little familiar with water. I'm here to testify for the U.S. Conference of Mayors and the Great Lakes and St. Lawrence Cities Initiative, and I ask that the testimony be inserted in the record. We did have the best tasting water in 2011. Our Blue Wave Beach has been consistent for 12 years. And the USA Today and NRDC rated us as one of the top beaches in the world. So to say the least, we're committed to water. We have put our focus on it, and the importance of the Great Lakes obviously cannot be overstated. As we saw with Toledo 20 years ago, they were actually rated as the best tasting water in America. We just recently had a meeting with them and Mayor Rahm Emanuel, which we held in Chicago, because of the problems that they had in shutting down water to 500,000 people. When you don't pay attention to the problems, obviously we can have dramatic effects. We are obviously seeing that 20% of the fresh water in the world is from the Great Lakes, and the Conference of Mayors did a study where only 35% of the mayors that responded knew where their water was coming from in 2020. That's a sad fact. But the mayors, we spend a lot of money on our infrastructure and our water. In 2012, we spent $111 billion on our infrastructure to provide those two. Congress, thankfully, spent $2 billion, so we thank you for that. We recognize the importance of infrastructure when 94% of the withdrawals that we're taking are for food production, drinking water, and energy. That's why GLRI is so incredibly important. You know, when you look at nearly 2,700 projects have been done since this started, this is incredible, and I got to tell you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member, thank you for doing this. Thank you for holding this meeting and talking about this. It's important to us. The conference obviously supports this. We ask and pray that you break down the silos within the agencies so we can all work together. We have been doing that. We have been efficiently and effectively using your taxpayer dollars because we know how vital every one of those dollars is. Closer to home in Racine, we have used GLRI money in a blending of 3 projects. One to take a beachfront that was so polluted you couldn't even walk on it, it smelled so bad, and turning that beach around, making it available to handicap and seniors. We then blended it with a road project where we took the road and took the runoff into a friendly, environmentally friendly, sensitive cleaning, and then cleaned out our harbor and worked with pervious pavement to provide an opening for the largest inland fishing tournament in the world. We do this blending because we know the dollars are important. We do it because we get peak efficiencies and cost savings by blending all this together. And I will tell you, GLRI has been consistently used to leverage multiple partners in funding because we've redeveloped areas that would have never been redeveloped without these funds. We rebuild our cities, and we do them efficiently and effectively. We are the ground game that you're talking about. When you're asking who's doing all the work, well, we're the ones. And we're here because we know the dollars are precious. Mayors have been responsible to protect the public health and safety of our citizens. That's our job. That's what we do. So we're prepared to break down the silos, work with you, create that efficiency and effectiveness, but also that flexibility. There's a Native American saying that I wanted to end with, and maybe touch on 2 other points if we have a second, which is that we don't inherit the land from our ancestors. We borrow it from our children. So we ask you to work with us so that we can create a future for our children that is an amazing one. With your permission, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member, I'd just like to say I know you have talked about brownfields in the past, and you have had testimony on it, and I will tell you that in cities like ours that are industrial, we would not be able to rebuild our cities and create new growth and a new economy without it. So I have leveraged the brownfields funding in my city for a potential of up to $200 million in growth over the last 5 years. The last thing is that I know that you are looking at authorization of this, as mentioned earlier. I hope you do that. The last piece is that I know that the appropriations language in the EPA agency section 428 of S 1645 is regarding discharges, and I will simply leave it at this because my time is over. We can control discharges about as well as we can control weather. And because of that, we simply cannot prepare for all of it. So we're doing our best, and we look forward to that conversation, but I hope you'll consider that language carefully.
Thank you. Mr. Wilking, the floor is yours. Welcome.
Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Napolitano, members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to be here today. I represent the Great Lakes Metro Chambers Coalition, which is a group of Midwestern chambers dedicated to the competitiveness of the Great Lakes trading region, emphasizing federal actions that will accelerate our region's economic comeback. We have an appreciation for the fundamental role of manufacturing in our region and a tight focus on targeted key issues especially important to this region. Together with the Great Lakes Manufacturing Council, we have pioneered the notion that the binational Great Lakes region is the third largest economy in the world when you take the combined state and provincial GDPs together. More about our agenda and our issues is in this brochure. I'm happy to make that available to the subcommittee with your leave. At the center of our region is the Great Lakes. It is a fundamental transportation artery, as Chairman Gibbs has noted, but it's also, from a different perspective, a defining and precious geographic asset. It's the most important body of fresh water in the world. It's critical to the economic well-being of our region, the social fabric in our region, and the employment of many thousands of people, and it's key to the region's and nation's future. A critical consideration is whether you can have growth and economic development and quality environment at the same time. And it used to be that people thought there was a false choice between growth and the environment. You had to choose one or another. But with technology and processes we have today, we can have both: clean, desirable waterways, economic growth, and that is often cited by political, business, and community leaders. Our coalition's Great Lakes-related priorities include what's been mentioned here before a time or two: the Clean Water State Revolving Fund, which is very important to the lakes, prevention of Asian carp, and eradication from the Mississippi and Ohio watersheds, which sit on the doorstep of our region. And obviously the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, where we spend much of our time. The effects of this program, the GLRI, are enormous. More than 2,500 projects the GLRI has been involved in overall, over 5,300 miles of U.S. coastland, and 99% of the funds have been obligated. We've gone over the numbers and the 5 pillars from other speakers. I won't belabor those, but those pillars are very, very important to the region's future. Some have tried to pin a specific ROI on this wide-ranging initiative. Our view is that that takes major time. There's a lot of interrelated, intricate, hard to quantify moving parts. It's complicated work, but we're learning. About 10 years ago, a Brookings group calculated an ROI that was about 3.5 to 1. More recently, a Grand Valley State University Muskegon Lake project calculated an ROI of about 6 to 1. These are systems approaches, however, and they're hard to model. But we would say the real key to all of this is that everybody in our region knows that this is the right thing to do. And then if we stay the course, good things, many good things are going to come of this initiative. It's bringing activity back, and it's vital to placemaking, which plays such a fundamental role in economic growth and decisions today. We support the minimum $300 million annual investment, which we think is a sensible level in these challenging times. We heartily support the notion of H.R. 223, the Great Lakes Restoration Improvement Act, for continuity, purposes and to really solidify this program for the next 5 or so years. We're very supportive of the EPA's Action Plan 2, and obviously that adds up to being supportive of the fundamental work that this initiative is accomplishing. Many things are working in this approach. You can see the results. That's an important part of it. The multi-agency interdisciplinary approach is key. We can build on this project, this initiative, and gain momentum from our results, from learning how to work on this together, and also from engaging more stakeholders. A question came up, how to do better. Really, there are a few things I would recommend on high-level terms and leave the details to the experts. Number one, formal authorization of H.R. 223 is very important. Also improved consultation, collaboration, and coordination, both vertically, up and down between federal and state agencies and local communities, as well as across the range of federal agencies. And obviously, the measuring and the monitoring systems are key, and the improvements that are coming in Action Plan 2. The data, the stories, making everything accessible to all, and also the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative Action Plan 2, also very, very important to the future. And one final comment, thinking about Canada. Very, very important to think of our relationship with our neighbor to the north. They are also the other key stakeholder. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Busdecker, welcome. The floor is yours.
Chairman Gibbs, Ranking Member Napolitano, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for this opportunity to be here today. I'm Doug Busdecker of Pemberville, Ohio, in Northwest Ohio. I am employed by the Andersons in Maumee, Ohio. I serve as a board member of the Ohio Agribusiness Association, which represents the Ohio crop nutrient industry, along with grain, feed, seed, and crop protection. The Andersons Incorporated, my employer, was founded in 1947 by Harold Anderson and built the first grain elevator in Maumee, Ohio. Currently, I serve as a senior manager for Northern Farm Centers consisting of Ohio, Indiana, and Michigan. I'm pleased to be here today to relate the many positive agricultural activities occurring in the Western Lake Erie Basin. During my career, I have been engaged with farmers on many engaged as an ag retailer in the region. Following the large algal bloom that occurred in 2011 in the Western Lake Erie Basin, many in the agricultural community recognized that ag retailers and farmers would need to play a bigger role finding solutions to address water quality challenges. Healthy water, clean, fishable, and drinkable water is important to everyone, including all in agriculture. We recognize that agriculture must be part of the solution. Following the algal bloom of 2011, the Nature Conservancy partnered with several key ag retailers in the Western Lake Erie Basin to develop the 4R Nutrient Stewardship Certification Program. This voluntary program was focused on ag retailers since agronomists, certified crop advisors, sales applicators were recognized as having a strong influence on nutrient use. Currently, 17 ag retailers have been certified, representing 1.2 million acres of cropland and 3,200 farmers in Ohio and Michigan. Another 10 are awaiting confirmation since our program launched March 18th in 2014. A total of 71 ag retailers are in the process or have indicated interest in becoming certified. The 4R Nutrient Certification Program was founded on the Fertilizer Institute's 4R Nutrient Stewardship Principles of the right source, right rate, right time, right place, which includes social, economic, and environmental BMPs. SCS Global, a respected independent audit development firm, was hired to create the 4R Nutrient Stewardship Certification Standard. This standard involves 41 different specific criteria that are audited to become certified. Many newer BMPs are already occurring in the Western Lake Erie Basin. Cover crops of all types are growing in popularity. Equipment manufacturers are offering several new tillage options to inject crop nutrients below the surface. Application of gypsum is quickly being adopted to sequester phosphorus, reducing dissolved reactive phosphorus runoff. Use of nutrient management plans to precisely determine the required nutritional balance for each crop is common. Commercial fertilizer nutrients are one of the single largest expense for traditional growers, and overuse leads to undesirable financial implications. Improving soil health resonates with all farmers. There is still much work to be accomplished, but conservation activities advance each year. On April 2, 2015, Ohio Governor John Kasich signed Senate Bill 1 into law. Senate Bill 1 prohibits manure and fertilizer application when fields are frozen, snow-covered, or saturated. In addition, Ohio Senate Bill 150, which requires anyone applying fertilizer on 50 acres or more to become certified, was signed by the governor in May of 2014. The Ohio Agribusiness Association fully supported passage of both SB 1 and SB 150. Research has shown that algal blooms in the Western Basin and Lake Erie are predominantly the result of excess dissolved reactive phosphorus in our rivers and streams. While the exact source and why the increasing amounts of DRP is not clearly understood, research has shown that transport from agricultural land plays a significant role. In the 70s and 80s, when Lake Erie was in serious trouble, through research, farmers widely adapted new tillage techniques such as no-till conservation tillage. These practices remain in place today and contribute greatly to a reduction in particulate phosphorus runoff and erosion. Additional research is needed to identify new BMPs that support a reduction of dissolved reactive phosphorus during periods of extreme rainfall. To that end, the fertilizer industry has committed $7 million to establish a 4R research fund. The goal of the fund is to establish sustainability indicators and environmental impacts for implementation of 4R nutrient stewardship across America. The fund provides a much-needed resource for the focus on measuring and documenting the economic, social, and environmental impacts of 4R nutrient stewardship. For the sake of time, I thank you again for this opportunity to provide you with an update on the many positive activities and projects occurring in the Western Basin of Lake Erie as we seek solutions to improve water quality. We all share the goal of having clean water for many generations to come. I would be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Mr. Lord, welcome. The floor is yours.
Members of the subcommittee, thank you for this opportunity to share our coalition's views with you today. As you've heard, the Great Lakes are a global resource with millions depending on their clean water. Yet the lakes still suffer from a legacy of toxic pollution, invasive species, harmful algal blooms, and the loss of habitat. 10 years ago, President Bush asked our region to prepare a comprehensive restoration plan to address these and other problems. The Great Lakes Regional Collaboration Strategy was created. 4 years later, President Obama proposed the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative that launched our region on a restoration path barely imaginable a decade ago. Because of the GLRI, we have been able to undertake one of the world's largest freshwater ecosystem restoration projects. Groups across the region are forging public-private partnerships to clean up toxic hotspots, restore fish and wildlife habitat, and combat invasive species, partnerships that may never have come together had it not been for the GLRI. The GLRI's size and scope means it plays a central, albeit not the only, role in successfully restoring and protecting the Great Lakes. The GLRI has accelerated progress and catalyzed critical restoration action that likely would never have happened otherwise. For example, in Duluth, toxic mud from the bottom of Stryker Bay was removed, making the bay safe to swim in once more. The city of Marysville, Michigan replaced a failing seawall with a natural sloping shore and wetland, providing valuable fish and wildlife habitat. The Brickstead Dairy near Green Bay planted cover crops, reducing runoff to improve water quality. How we're accomplishing this work is equally as impressive. The GLRI is a model for large landscape-scale restoration. It ensures the focus remains on the region's highest priorities. It sought to fix the problem GAO identified all the way back in 2003, that there was inadequate coordination among federal agencies. Now, the EPA quickly converts the funding it receives for restoration activities by passing it through to other federal agencies so they can direct it through their existing authorized programs at the region's highest needs. The GAO seemed to recognize these benefits in its most recent report. It found that federal agencies had allocated almost all the GLRI funds that they had received, and that it promotes efficiency and effectiveness in by bringing agencies together to agree on common goals to prioritize restoration work. In short, the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative is working. However, no program is perfect. The GLRI should be continuously reviewed and updated to reflect the changes to the lakes, program deficiencies that have arisen or yet to be addressed, or new threats that have emerged. So what changes should be made? First, Congress should remove all doubt that the region is on the right path and restoration efforts are on track. Pass H.R. 223, the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative Act. Passing this bill creates greater certainty for the program and allows everyone to focus on getting the job done. Second, we support even greater targeting of GLRI funds in priority watersheds. However, we expect the GLRI to invest in all 5 focus areas and to fund activities in these areas as a prescription for recovery. We also want to see more consistency on when requests for proposals are released each year. Third, we remain worried that we aren't as effective on larger lake-wide scales at monitoring scientific assessment and project evaluation. Generally speaking, our coalition's members support the integration of monitoring requirements for projects they are undertaking. Successful monitoring has assisted HOW groups in documenting short and long-term project successes. However, it's not clear how comprehensive and systematic monitoring is and how these local efforts add up to a well-monitored, scientifically assessed system. Since the beginning, we have been saying that monitoring requires more GLRI resources than it receives now, and that those funds be available beyond just a couple of years so we can track long-term progress. It would also help if this monitoring stemmed from a Great Lakes research plan, which has yet to be assembled. Fourth, buy-in from the Great Lakes community is also critical to the overall success of the GLRI. Agencies at every level of government must talk to the public to help understand what progress has been made, where efforts should focus next, and whether the restoration priorities of the Great Lakes restoration community, and therefore the GLRI, should change based on those assessments. Annual engagement of the non-federal stakeholder community leads to better coordination and better alignment of resources and work at all levels. To sum up, the Great Lakes restoration investments are paying off for the environment and economy. The Great Lakes Restoration Initiative is government at its best. Agencies working with business, civic, and community groups collaboratively on a common goal. The results are impressive and underscore why this national effort needs to be authorized so that we can see the job through to the end. Cutting funding will only make the job harder and more expensive. Thank you for inviting me to share our views with you. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. I'll start off a question here. Mr. Allen, in your testimony you described the need for increased coordination and consultation and engagement between the federal GLRI agencies and the Great Lakes states. Can you give us some examples of how the current efforts by the federal agencies in the areas is just not enough, and then, are you treated as co-equal, are states treated as co-equal partners? Can you just elaborate?
Yes, thank you. It has been subject to our written testimony as well. I think the states are feeling the necessity to be sort of engaged in some of the decision-making process, not just in the recipients of the funds, but really a little more upstream in that process to make sure that we can coordinate as much as we can with other existing state programs, state resources, and really at the community level too, to help be part of that facilitation. So I think that's an important aspect. As I said, I think the program has worked well. A lot of money gets targeted to the right things, but I think the states would like to see some further integration sort of upstream in that decision making. We did receive a letter to Administrator McCarthy.
Are the states involved in the subgroups that we talked about in the first panel?
They have not up to this point, but we have some commitments from EPA that the states will be included further in that deliberative process.
Yeah, I think that would be a critical component.
Yes.
I mean, it's a partnership. They ought to be involved in down the weeds. Mayor Dickett, can you explain kind of on that same question as a mayor, relationship with the municipalities, with the federal government, and on this question about your consultation and involvement?
Well, first of all, thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, we have had great coordination with EPA Region 5. We don't, as mayors, at least I don't, and most of the mayors that I know, we don't go out and just ask for money willy-nilly and just say we want to take all the money without project, coordination, and dramatic results. So the first thing is we work with the EPA and on the problem areas that we see for the end game, and that end game is usually not only cleaning up the environment but providing that economic benefit as it moves forward, whether it's helping with business development or overall quality of life issues for your cities. The coordination that can go on top of that is the additional coordination with the state. And when you've got all three of those players playing in the same sandbox, you've got some really good things going on. So they can coordinate their money for efficiency and effectiveness with the cities and the counties and the federal government. It's the perfect answer. The issue that we deal with, candidly, is the silos within the federal government that there's no flexibility, and that limits sometimes even the money that you can go after because it doesn't fit perfectly into a box.
Yeah, you'd think with the grant process that would help break down some of that, but that's what we need to work on, I think, in the authorization.
Grants and prioritization, correct.
Yeah. Mr. Bustecker, on the 4R program, we talk about nutrient stewardship, dealing with the right source, right rate, right time, and right place. Obviously, that's just plain common sense to me as a farmer. And your statement about excess nutrient supply costs money, and you can't hardly do that, especially in today's commodity prices. It's not a smart thing to do. Has the GLRI provided any funds to help with your efforts for the 4R program?
Not, Mr. Chairman, thank you for that question. Not directly for the 4R certification program. That has been funded by industry as well as the folks who become certified. They go through the audit. They have to pay for the auditing process and so forth.
Are you seeing, with GPS, global positioning, and I know my larger grain farmer friends are, it's all in their equipment out there, especially in northwestern Ohio, seeing more farmers moving to more specific placement of nutrients using GPS. Is that starting to happen or not?
Well, that's becoming very common. We call it variable rate technology in terms of application of nutrients. And I would say that's becoming commonplace. It's not 100%, but it's rapidly progressing forward as the way to apply nutrients.
And I think for anybody listening to this or viewing this is, the reason I raise that question, I think it's important because people don't realize, in any given field you can have tremendous yield differentials and fertility levels, and because the soil does change, across a 50, 100 acre field or whatever, and if we can, it helps the farmer's bottom line by getting that nutrient placed where it's needed and not put excess on where it's not needed, and that's what GPS would come in, and I think you concur with that, right?
Yes, that's correct, and we've actually for years, many years previously, used one rate across the field, but today we're breaking this up into individual management zones based on yields. And that's been occurring not on all fields, but we're progressing that way. That's kind of becoming the way of the industry.
As the Natural Resources Conservation Service, are they doing enough, or the more they can do, or what's your thoughts on that?
Well, they're doing a lot in the area, especially with the cover crops and the various things that are going on. They are a great help, yes.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Napolitano. Yield to you.
Thank you, Mr. Gibbs. And to that question, Mr. Busdecker, this is all voluntary, if I remember correctly. The report, the amount of nutrients, the amount of farmers utilizing fertilizer that was being now informed in the way it's being utilized by you. Do you have data on that? Do you have any data shows the trend, the lines of the application of these nutrients to the land, both commercial and manure?
Well, the voluntary part that you made mention was the certification program for the ag retailer.
It's only about 70% certification, right?
Well, not 70%. We've got, I think it was 17, I believe I said, that were certified ag retailers. Now, that's not farmers. That represents about 1.2 million acres in the western basin of Lake Erie and about 3,200 farmers. But as far as the participation on this nutrient management and so forth, that's a pretty high percentage of farmers because really our sales and certified crop advisors provide that information to the grower.
Do you have any of that data?
Specifically, I'm not sure I understand the question.
The data on the shows the trend of the lines on the application of the nutrients, commercial and manure. Are you showing how much is being utilized
Well, we know based on crop production, that's how we determine how much to apply. It starts with a soil test, then we go through the crop production, we determine yield goals, and then we determine how much nutrient needs to be applied, which includes livestock waste, if there is livestock waste, as well as commercial nutrients.
Okay, well, could you provide any of the information to the subcommittee so we know what's happening and maybe be able to understand a little more?
Certainly.
Thank you, sir. And several of you have talked about the importance of the authorization of the GLRI that's in the HR 223. Mr. Lord does raise the importance of the reauthorization of the EPA's Great Lakes National Program Office and also of the Great Lakes Legacy Act. Both are laws. Do you agree that these programs also are important for Congress to reauthorize?
If I may, yes. And the reason why is simply when we're working at the local level, it's all about consistency. And if you know, for instance, if you have a developer coming into a city like ours where you've just done a brownfield redevelopment, and that person, that investor knows that they're coming in, but they're going to need some additional EPA work to make that happen, to create that better riverfront or lakefront, then if there's a consistency in the program, you know that if you don't get it in the first year, you can still apply the next year and still try to work through those to make those blend together. If there's no consistency and you don't know if that money is there, then you're always battling back and forth to see if the project's actually going to happen. So it's, for us at the local level, it's purely the consistency knowing that the opportunity is there. It allows us to do longer planning, create more efficiency, and make our projects more effective.
Anybody else?
I would agree. Having a suite of tools available, GLRI, Great Lakes Legacy Act, and then having a federal agency, in this case EPA, through the Great Lakes National Program Office, through GLIMPO, being able to really sort of be that voice and really have that set of relationships developed.
So it does have importance.
We think it has great importance moving forward. It adds to that clarity and adds to the collaboration.
Anybody else? No? Well, thank you for that. Mayor Dickert, I hate to bring up the issue of the MS4, but that's going to have to be another issue that is going to affect all communities. And I'm sure you know Mary Ann Lutz.
Oh, all too well.
Who's now on my staff doing the MS4 work with EPA.
Yes.
So I would want to be sure that we communicate that we need to get more of that information so that EPA, it does work with the communities to ensure that that is done, that isn't heavy-handed as an unfunded mandate to our communities.
Right. And candidly, the unfunded mandates that come down and sometimes the consent decrees that come down, we are already as a local level working on. We may not have met necessarily the goal, but I rarely know a mayor who simply sits back and says, whatever happens, happens. We're trying to work ahead of everything so that we don't have to worry about it. So any time that we can get the effort working together, it's great. It's dealing with the consent decrees and the mandates. I always tell everybody it's always better to work together.
Well, yeah, but keep members of Congress informed because they don't know anything about the stormwater issue, or many of them are not aware that it's going to be an unfunded mandate on their communities.
Absolutely.
And they're going to be raising holy, you know what, when it comes down as a mandate.
Yep, absolutely.
To Mr. Lord, some have criticized the GLRI for the pace which expends the funds. Isn't it true that these programs take years to complete and that a more appropriate measure would be the total number of funds obligated to the long-term projects?
I would agree with that. We see that this is a region that has winter. The lakes freeze, there's snow cover. The ability for projects to actually be implemented can take years just by the vagaries of the weather patterns. I mean, we just don't know. So using obligations, I think, is a much better benchmark than trying to use expenditures or funds.
Make more sense?
I think it does, and I think the GAO report that came out in 2015 also highlights 3 or 4 reasons why expenditures may take longer and why you may not be seeing expenditures as quickly as you do the obligation of those funds.
Thank you. Real question, Mr. Allen, real quickly. The issue that the EPA's old reporting system is now replaced by EGLE. Have you seen that system? Have you looked at it?
I have not yet. I think it was still in final testing, and I have not had a chance to take a look.
Are you being included in being able to understand how it will be applicable?
We will, definitely.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Ribble.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mayor Dickert, it's good to have you here. I live up near Green Bay, and I had a chance to visit your city on many occasions in my 35 years that I've been traveling around the country and state as a commercial contractor. My question for you, and I've got a couple questions for you if you don't mind. I've heard from the Green Bay Clean Water Agency, as well as read in your testimony, your concerns about the Interior Appropriations Bill in the Senate. It sounds a little inconsistent. I wonder if you can help me navigate the inconsistency when you talk about opposing the language when they're asking for no discharge. Can you expand your comments on that a little bit, because it seems like it's not consistent with the rest of your testimony?
Sure, and thank you, Mr. Ribble. It's great to see you again, Congressman Ribble. When you come down with Senator Kirk's proposal, I believe you're talking about, when you come down with a proposal that says that you have to eliminate all overflows, there is no system, and you can ask the city of Houston, because I was talking with their mayor the week that they had their storm flooding. There is no system in America that is designed for the complexities of the weather that we're having right now. If we get 7 inches of rain in Milwaukee, 28 hours later, it will be in Racine, and we will be flooding, and there's nothing that we can do about it because it's a 500-year event. So what we talk about is we are all working, and we talked about this earlier, where I think Congresswoman Norton brought it up. We are all working at creating methods and systems that capture stormwater, hold it, clean it, allow it to filter through the ground. We're all working to try to prevent those big 500-year events, but it's impossible to do that. There's no way Houston could have prepared for what happened with their storm that they had. They were 3 feet underwater. So to simply say that we all have to get to that level, by the time we get to that level and that 500-year flood happens, we're probably going to have an overflow at that time. So what we ask is that we're already working as a city. We don't have combined sewers. So we're already working as a city to prevent all that. We're putting in 2 million-gallon storage tanks. We're doing all the work environmentally. To simply say that we all have to do that, that will cost the city of Racine $700 million for 80,000 people. $65 billion, I think, is the price tag for the country, for the Great Lakes region. It simply is unaffordable. So what I would ask is that we work together in advance with these communities to find those best practices and work through those. Milwaukee is a perfect example of MMSD is working to do different stormwater systems with their combined sewer to make sure that that stormwater never even makes it into the system. So we're trying to do that. When you look at Green Bay, 1.4% of the Great Lakes, or of Lake Michigan water, 30% of the nutrient load into that area. You know, there are problems that we're all trying to work through. We ask that you focus on the big problems and work with those folks like Mayor Jim Schmidt in Green Bay and try to help them out. We're trying to do our own at the local level to prevent this from coming in the first place. But I will tell you, when a 500-year flood hits, you pray. You pray hard, because there isn't a heck of a lot else you can do besides that.
I thank you for expanding your comments that you had in writing here. I want to also go a little bit further. In your testimony, you mentioned the use of porous pavements and things like that in one of the projects. Has your city gone to the point of modifying your building codes to a 21st century standard requiring porous pavements, parking lots, sidewalks, vegetated roofing,
right,
things like that that would actually bring our construction practices into the 21st century as far as managing water runoffs during high rain events?
Absolutely. We do, and we work through a series of best practices with the U.S. Conference of Mayors and the Great Lakes groups to do that. We've actually gone above and beyond that. That project that I talked about earlier, where we have the boat ramp, the harbor, and the road, all of those were done with environmental sensibility to not only do porous pavement, but then to take stormwater management and manage it through the process of plants and things like that to pre-process the water. We have the system that you talked about earlier where the stormwater comes off and it goes through 5 tiers of environmental purifying before it even gets to the lake. We do all that. The thing that we're doing on top of that, because as mayors we have to stay efficient and then we have to continue to be efficient. We actually go to a road system where once we do stormwater and water and you put the cement on top of the road, utilities have the right to cut that road up the next day. We actually work now with our roads where we bring everybody in ahead of time, all the utilities, including water and stormwater, so when we do a road, all of those 5 layers are done, so when that cement cap goes on top, that road isn't going to be touched for 20 years. Those types of processes and long-term planning to the issue, Mr. Chairman, that you brought up earlier about whether those funds and Congresswoman Napolitano talked about whether that consistency of those funds are there, that allows us to plan all that out so that we can create all that efficiency so we can hold back all those items. So we do that every day. The best practices we get from our colleagues. Mayor Daley said that, the one thing that you do as a mayor is steal, and I said as a Catholic, that's tough for me. But we do. We steal each other's ideas, and we blend them into what we're doing in our city.
And I think it's really important because I often read language like it's in your testimony where you say, I cannot emphasize enough that we all must be fully engaged and fully committed to water issues if we're going to succeed. You can't do this halfway. I hear that a lot. Yeah. But then when you do the deep dive on building codes, you see that they're not really fully committed. And so they don't. And I would also suggest that to Mr. Wolking for the chambers to also be taking a look at how corporate America can be a partner in this issue as well. It has to be all of us participating as agriculture, dealing with non-point source and point source. If we all would actually move into the 21st century, we could preserve this very important chain of water. So thank you very much for being here. And with that, I yield back.
Thank you. And if I may, Mr. Chairman, it's not just in the ordinances, but in the bidding. Your bidding has to include that as well. Thank you.
Mr. Davis, do you have any questions? Mr. Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Apologize for the side conversation there. And thank you, Mr. Rakita. First off, witnesses, we really appreciate you being here. My first question is for Mr. Allen. You wrote in your testimony that federal agencies are not coordinating, consulting, and engaging with the states as well as they could or should. What are some ways that the federal agencies need to treat the states more as co-equal partners in implementing the GLRI program?
It's a good question. So we did post that to the EPA in our letter to Gina McCarthy, and she has written us back just as of a day or so ago, and we can enter that letter into the record as a response. And we do agree with this. She's going to invite us or open up additional quarterly discussions with the states, with the regional working group. We think this will help really start to facilitate more of sort of that front-end planning than just, here's the priorities, here's the projects, here's where we have to go. So as I mentioned before, we're really looking to move that upstream a little bit more in the decision process.
Great, thank you. And Mayor, Racine, Wisconsin, right?
Yes.
Who's your member of Congress in Racine?
Congressman Ryan.
Who?
Congressman Paul Ryan. You might know him.
Not ringing a bell. No.
He's a good-looking, tall guy. You should get to know him.
Rakita? Paul's great, and please do tell him that we were giving him some flack here in the T&I committee.
I hope to see him in a little bit. I'll remind him.
Yeah, let him know we do have other committees here besides his vaunted ways and means, okay? Mayor, I've been a supporter of public-private partnerships. Mr. Lord mentioned more public-private partnerships in his testimony. I think they're a good means of leveraging and coordinating resources. As a matter of fact, my colleague Sherry Bustos and I, along with our senators from Illinois, ensured that there was a provision in the WRDA package to encourage more public-private partnerships. Do you see a role for P3s in the Great Lake restoration projects? And if so, how can that role lead to further success? And what idea may you have to get the federal agencies past their hesitance of doing them?
Well, first of all, I think P3s are imperative. We use them on a regular basis because the fact is many of these companies, large and small, have the expertise that you need. If there's one thing that you learn early as a mayor, there's no book on how to do the job. So you have to go out and find the organizations, the companies that actually can provide the work, especially when you're in emergency modes, to finish and help you with these. I think P3s are not only imperative, but I think it's part of everything that we do. How can we encourage that and move it forward? I still think that the blending of the local governments, the state priorities, and the federal priorities should be matched up a little bit more. I think that we can get better leverage. The other thing that I would suggest is that, and I think the EPA has allowed for this already, regionalization of project planning. So in other words, if you have 2 or 3 municipalities in the same area, especially in the Maumee Valley of Ohio, that are looking at solving that bigger, very complex situation, allowing projects to be worked together by one company. If there's one company that's very good at what they're doing, allow them to work on 3 projects at the same time to help blend the efficiencies and savings of that effort. So those are a couple things that I would suggest.
So you're saying the federal agencies should let local municipalities walk and chew gum at the same time?
We would love that.
Yes, thank you. We would too. Mr. Vustiker, hey, thank you for being here too. Question for you, is the NRCS doing enough to support the ag community to implement conservation best management practices to reduce non-point source pollution? And yes or no?
Yes and no. They could do more. We could always do more. There's a lot of work to be done. We're not
that was my next question. What more should they be doing?
Well, certainly cover crops are a big piece of what we're doing out here today. Control structures on tile, and even maybe a little bit off to the side here, research is another big piece. We need to do more research on this edge of field work so we know where this dissolved reactive phosphorus is really coming and what BMPs can help mitigate it.
Excellent. We actually just had a research hearing in my other committee. I had another hearing, which is why I was late for this one, in the House Ag Committee. And our hearing yesterday in the subcommittee I chair focused on ag research and working with our land-grant universities. So if you see a way to partner with our land grants and with other institutions within the ag community to get more research dollars toward conservation, please do let me know. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back the second I have left.
Mr. Rokita.
I thank the chairman. I appreciate the witness testimony today and also from the first panel as well. I give my apologies. Today in 3 committees, and starting yesterday actually, we're getting ready to employ a concept called reconciliation. And the Ed and Workforce Committee just did its part of the reconciliation process for this year that originated in the Budget Committee that I'm also a part of. So it was a busy day for a lot of us. No excuse, but just wanted you to know where I was before this. And even though I was distracted by the gentleman from my left, and though I associated with him regularly, I was able to get a little bit of hear a little bit of your testimony. And so I'd like to focus my questions, I think mostly, and no offense to anyone else, but I want to focus my questions directly to Mr. Lord, if that's okay. Reading your statement last night, you talk about the number of jobs that can be created on the Great Lakes due to these restoration projects. I'm from Munster, Indiana, Lake County, so we're right up there, grew up there. And would like to think I appreciate the cultural value, the economic value, the environmental value of those lakes. But this committee and this subcommittee is new to me. I want to understand more when you say this will create jobs. Do you mean to imply that these restoration efforts are going to go on in perpetuity? Or is there some day where this ends? Therefore, technically making the jobs temporary. Yes, that's a trick question.
I would suggest that that day is a while away, so these jobs would be fairly permanent. We have a lot of work that needs to be done in the Great Lakes region to address the decades of problems that have been building. While we've been able to make progress in cleaning up our areas of concern, for example, we still have 27 that remain unattended and need to have more focus. While we've been able to make some progress in creating new habitat in wetlands, we've had a significant amount of
in your mind, when
habitat
is
that's been
enough
lost.
enough? Well, when would you be satisfied definitionally that the restoration has in fact occurred?
I think
when these 20 projects are done, we're done?
Well, I don't know if it's as simple as that. That's a very good question, but it's a very difficult question, at least for me to answer.
We got 2 minutes.
Well, I'll do my best. I don't know when we'll be done. I think some of the indicators that we would like to see that would help suggest when we may be close to being finished with our restoration activities would be for a system of lakes and connecting channels that are resilient, that can accommodate the stresses that we have put on them through the legacy of toxic pollution or habitat loss or the introduction of new invasive species, or the impacts that we're seeing from climate change. So we would have a better sense as to knowing that we'll be closer to being finished with this project when the reaction of the system is such that it's able to adapt adapt more effectively to the changes that we're asking the system to make.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to jump in on that? My line of questioning in terms of response, Mr. Allen.
I would, and I'll direct it in one hand specifically to the area of concern program. That's one of the big pieces of GLRI. Communities have set out very real markers for what they see on all the different beneficial use impairments. When they meet the next threshold to be able to remove that, and if you remove all the beneficial uses, then you can delist the area of concern. So that one has very real and definitive markers of success. Habitat replacement, loss of benthic habitat, fish, consumption of fish, all those pieces. And we see done in the case of GLRI and under area of concern programs specifically when each of those markers are met and the community essentially agrees with the progress made. So as principles and actions and projects take place in those communities, as we continue to list the use impairments, dredging, whatever that is, once those are agreed to and acknowledged by the community, we can then move on to other things.
Anyone else?
Collect enough of those, then the community can celebrate its success.
Anyone else for 10 seconds?
If I may, yeah, I think you need to understand, too, that getting there gets us to a point where we can say we've accomplished these objectives, but we also have to be able to sustain. And these are changing ecological and environmental systems. So can we also sustain and can we also then find there are other needs as well? We don't know.
Thank you. My time's expired. Appreciate it.
I have one question. I want to kind of finish up, Mr. Wolfgang. In your written testimony, I don't think you maybe highlight this in your verbal testimony, but you talk about the 5,300 miles of shoreline and the complex work, and we learn as we go. And then you talk about the second major phase of the plan, 15 to 2019. Welcome to focus on those key areas you talked about, but introduction of science-based adaptive management improvements and prioritization of better reporting on measures of progress and their impact. I think you've tried to work with I see you have Brookings Institution and Grand Valley State to try to get cost-benefit analysis and try to quantify, I guess, where we're headed, and it's hard to do. But do you want to elaborate a little bit on trying to monitor, the impacts and the economic impacts for the benefit?
I think that's the most difficult part of this whole process when we're talking about measuring in metrics. I think it's easier to measure the environmental impacts and results, but then when you start talking about, well, what economic activity proceeds from that, it's a lot more complicated than saying we're putting a machine on a floor that can put out a certain number of parts at a certain estimated cost, and we're borrowing X funds at X percent. This is different, and it would seem to me that there is a great opportunity here, if we stay the course, to observe as we have finished projects and we have attained results, to watch what happens in those communities, which partly will be as a result of what has been accomplished with the initiative. Again, you're talking about people and systems and environment, and they all come together. There are many things that go into the soup. But clearly, I think as we get more time under our belts, observing what we've been able to accomplish and observe what happens in the communities, as we go forward, I think we'll be able to see measurable results that can at least partly be attributed and tied back to the initiative. It's the level of activity, I think. That's a great word to keep in mind. As these things happen and are completed, you're going to see activity as a result in those areas, whereas before you were seeing no activity.
Yeah. I think that's a good point to end this hearing. But I think I want to thank you all for coming in. Do you want one point? Go ahead.
Just one very quickly, and that is to Mr. Lord. Mr. Rokita touched on the job creation issue, and while it's been 5 years, you've already created the jobs. They're going to hopefully be another 5 years. How long do you think this can continue to create the jobs, and will those jobs change as new technology, as improvements are done? What do you see will happen, the challenges that may be ahead?
Well, I think the jobs, well, it depends on the type of jobs that we're talking about, but some of the things that we've seen, some of the results that we've seen as a result of the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative through some of the habitat improvements, for example, very much sustain the kinds of outdoor jobs that we would like to see in the region, jobs for folks that sell the guns and the ammo and the fishing hooks and the rest of it to the people that are going into Michigan or Ohio or any of the other Great Lakes states in order to enjoy the outdoors. As I also noted, the restoration project that we've undertaken, while we are 5 years in, we've got a long way to go.
How long do you think that might have to go?
I can't answer that question, ma'am. It's a very
3 decades, 4 decades.
These are large lakes with a lot of problems, and we've I think made a very significant and valiant effort and a lot of progress to date in cleaning them up. But as noted, we've got 27 AOC areas of concern that remain, and they're very complicated projects in terms of getting those finished. So I think there's a lot more. The bottom line is there's a lot more work. But the benefits, as Mr. Walking was highlighting, are that when we clean up these areas of concern, for example, these communities that had this anchor around their necks in terms of this, is gone, and so you could see the development coming, the high rises or whatever they may want to do in these newly cleaned up places. We've begun to see some of that happen. And so that's the kind of excitement that the GLRI can bring, and I think will continue to bring as we make more progress in the future.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Well, again, I want to thank you for coming in. I think it was quite an interesting discussion. Hopefully we can move forward with the formal authorization and reliable, sustainable funding. And we had a hearing here recently on brownfields, Mayor. That's a key issue. We've made a lot of progress there, I think. And then integrated permitting and planning, I think you highlighted that. We've had hearings on that and trying to work with the U.S. EPA to allow municipalities like yourselves to do integrated permitting so you can address what your needs are. There might be different needs in Cleveland or whatever. And so, but thank you for all coming in to highlight this and the importance of the Great Lakes and the economic stability and for job creation in the region. Thank you very much, and this concludes our hearing.